Hello and welcome back to another video in which we'll be going over even more obscure artifacts from the world of the Elder Scrolls. The previous videos talked about artifacts from Arena and Daggerfall, which check out if you haven't already. Today, we're going to be diving deep to uncover some of the most obscure artifacts out there. Most of these artifacts aren't associated with one particular game. In fact, most of these don't physically appear in any game, instead having mentions in various in-game books and dialogue. Still, they all manage to enhance the vast lore of the Elder Scrolls in a unique way. You're probably very familiar with the Amulet of Kings, but did you know that there was another item associated with the rulers of Tamriel? It's only ever depicted once, being in Arena, where we can see Uriel Septim VII wearing it. In Oblivion, Baris has the following to say about it.
The Amulet of Kings is a sacred symbol of the Empire. Most people think of the red dragon crown, but that's just jewelry.
Interestingly enough, it appears that the red dragon crown is apparently more well known to the common people than the Amulet of Kings. As far as we know, the crown possesses no real power and is simply a decorative headpiece. The exact origins of the crown are unknown, though there is a section from the first edition of the Pocket Guide to the Empire that could shed some light on it. After the Battle of Sancretor, in which King Cuchulainn and his general, Tiber Septim, pushed back the invading Nords and Bretons from western Colombia into their respective provinces, a Reachman assassin invaded the imperial palace. There, he was said to have slit the throat of Tiber Septim after having set the palace on fire. It then gives the following passage. But from the smoldering ruin he came, one hand to his neck and with Cuchulainn's crown in the other. The legions wept at the sight. His northern magic had saved him, but the voice that led them would be more silent from that night on. His word could no longer rout an army with a roar, but he could still command one with a whisper. He took for himself a Cyrodiilic name, Tiber Septim, and the heroic name of kings, Izmir, Dragon of the North. And with those names he took, too, the red diamond crown of the Cyrodiils and became their true emperor. The red dragon crown could be the same crown that King Cuchulainn once wore, though from the way the passage is written, it could also be another one obtained later on. An interesting thing to note is that the crown seems to go by many different names. In this passage, it's referred to as the Red Diamond Crown. In a brief history of the Empire, it's referred to as the Imperial Diadem and the Imperial Tiara. In the book Shazar and the Divines, it's called the Imperial Crown. In these books, the Amulet of Kings being passed on is never mentioned. It is unknown if the Mede dynasty is in possession of the crown. Lillandril is a city located in the Somerset Isles, and the flask itself can be seen depicted on the city's banners. It was discovered by a group of elves living in the city in the First Era, and they discovered that it had the property of being able to absorb any type of magic. It was so powerful that a stable boy was apparently able to kill a high wizard of Valenwood with just the power of the flask. These elves, fearful of assassins, decided to seek protection from the Durrani clan, yet they were shipwrecked near Stros Mackay, and the flask was lost. In Redguard, Cyrus is able to recover the flask by piecing together a map that revealed its location. He used it to defeat the slow necromancer Nagasta and later offered it to the Daedric prince Clavicus Vile in exchange for his sister's soul. The flask can be assumed to have remained with Clavicus Vile ever since. A lot of mystery surrounds the flask. For starters, we have no idea who created it or where it comes from. It's probably not any sort of Adric or Daedric artifact, as it then would have been known to Vile, or at least mentioned in some other text. The single book it's mentioned in is called Elven Artifacts Volume 3, which could imply that it was created by elves. Considering the fact that it was in the early years of the Somerset Isles, perhaps it was made by none other than the Sigic Order, and then somehow lost. An important thing to note about the flask is that it has the capability to not only reflect magic, but absorb it. There are some other artifacts that have the capability to reflect magic, such as Spellbreaker, Chrysamere, and the Warlock's Ring, though none of them possess the power to absorb magic, putting the flask into a class of its own. It now seems to be forever lost, so who really knows just what the flask was truly capable of? This is yet another artifact that we know little about, and most info on it also comes from Redguard. It was a subject of great interest to Cyrus, with him wishing to eventually attain it. Bits of dialogue with Drekis and Tobias, two characters from Redguard, reveal that the Eye of Argonia is said to be the priceless king's jewel of ancient Black Marsh. In a comic book that came with copies of Redguard titled The Origin of Cyrus, which is essentially a prequel to the events of the game, a mock Q&A section was included, written by none other than Michael Kirkbride himself. One of the questions inquires about the Eye of Argonia, with this being included in the response. Cyrus has been searching for the Eye all over Tamriel. All we can say is that it's a priceless gem that also serves as a key to the lost city of Black Marsh. There was supposedly a planned sequel to Redguard, which would have been titled The Elder Scrolls Adventures 2, Eye of Argonia. According to a few statements from officials at Bethesda, including Todd Howard, Eye of Argonia would have been a game in a similar vein to Redguard, an action-adventure game that followed Cyrus' exploits in Black Marsh while looking for the Eye. It was cancelled due to Redguard's poor sales, and we can only assume that whatever the lost city of Black Marsh is would have been explored in the game. This artifact is mentioned in Volume 12 of the 16 Accords of Madness, which go over meetings between Sheogorath and the other Daedric princes. This one concerns an interaction he had with Malakath. The story begins with an orc known as Emegro Kera, whose noble deeds gained him fame within High Rock. One day, while he was camping, a stranger offered him a mysterious sword known as Neb-Crescen, which Emeg took in exchange for giving the stranger furs and food. A week went by without him needing to draw the weapon, until he heard sounds coming from a nearby forest. He drew the blade, and his mind was suddenly overcome by frenzy and rage. When the bloodlust faded, he saw that he had viciously cut down an orc woman without even realizing it. Disgusted by his actions and the way Neb-Crescen clouded his mind, he discarded the blade and ran away from the scene. Later on, Sheogorath summoned Malakath and showed him the corpse. Malakath was furious that one of his own children was murdered and went to find the perpetrator. Sheogorath offered him Neb-Crescen and convinced Malakath to slay him with the blade, which would banish Emeg to the Shivering Isles. Malakath agreed and used Neb-Crescen to cut off Emeg's head when he found him. It was only then that he realized that he had caused another one of his children to be killed. He hadn't previously known that Emeg was also an orc. Not only that, but this is one of his biological children, with which he had blessed an orc maiden with long ago. He could only look on in horror as Sheogorath appeared and took Emeg's head away, forced to watch his own son be taken to another plane. It becomes obvious that the stranger was most certainly Sheogorath, manipulating another unfortunate mortal for his entertainment. While we're on the topic of Daedric princes and swords related to them, let's talk about Penitent and the Sword of the Moon Reiver. As you might already know, Malakath was known as Trinimac, a deity revered by the Aldemir before he was eaten by Boethia and turned into Malakath. It is known that he wielded a sword known as Penitent, called Vosh'Rach in Orcish, which translates to Blade of Courage. It's considered to be a revered artifact amongst orcs and priests of Trinimac. Malakath is known to be associated with the Great Sword, as seen in statues and concept art of him, but it is unknown if this is Penitent, as the sword is associated with Trinimac rather than Malakath. And finally, we have the Sword of the Moon Reiver. This is an artifact that appears only in Battlespire. It is said to have been made from Mehrunes Dagon's own substance, and is believed to be the only weapon capable of harming the Daedric prince. During the invasion of the Battlespire, the Apprentice, the game's protagonist, defeated the Dark Seducer which wielded the blade and used it to banish Dagon, causing the Battlespire to collapse. The exact origins of the blade are unexplained, so what it means by it being made of his own substance is unknown. It also makes you wonder why he would even keep around a blade that has the power to harm him. Perhaps it's indicative of its extreme destructive power. That certainly would have been useful during the events of Oblivion. It also begs the question, if it has the power to hurt Mehrunes Dagon, could it harm the other Daedric princes as well? If so, we're looking at an incredibly powerful weapon here, but we can only assume that it was lost after the Battlespire collapsed.